So, councillors, it's just gone 5:30. I declare the ordinary council meeting of the 18th of May 2021, held in council chambers at the City of Subiaco, open at 5:30 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the City's website following the meeting. So, councillors, we'll move to item 2, apologies and leave of absence. I understand we do have an apology from Councillor Mansfield. And I note we have a leave of absence from Councillor Power. So do I have a mover and seconder, please, for Councillor Power for the period of 24th of May to 28th of May? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Rowe. I'll put that to the vote, please. Thank you. So the leave of absence is passed 11-0. Item 3, disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest for this evening? Councillor McMullen.
Sorry. All right. I, Councillor David McMullen, wish to declare an interest in item C3 of tonight's agenda. The type of interest I wish to declare is an impartiality interest. The nature of my interest is that my son attends the toddler gym from time to time, which is held at the Subiaco Pcyc. Thank you.
No further disclosures of interest? We'll move then to item 4, response to previous public questions taken on notice, which there are none. So we come to item 5, public time. We have public questions now. As you may have read, we do have a conditions of entry on the door, but I don't think that's probably worth reading out, given we don't have a packed gallery this evening. So our first public question is from Ms. Leader of Cuthbert Street in Shenton Park.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. In the past, the Mayor has graciously shared her wisdom from her presiding chair, and I will do so again. My questions relate to the report on the Subiaco inquiry that was recently tabled in State Parliament. Question 1. When asked to comment on the report, the Mayor apparently welcomed the recommendations but said they were the bare minimum needed, a sentiment shared by the community and for which she should be congratulated, as none of the recommendations mention reviewing the role of the Mayor. Assuming it is to this glaring omission that she referred, will she now undertake to only speak on behalf of council resolutions, regardless of whether or not she personally supported them? And question 2, point 202 of the inquiry's report states that before being denied access to the administrative building, the Mayor was known to interrupt meetings, including one between the CEO and one of the directors during a performance review. As the report makes no mention of the Mayor's response to this apparent breach of protocol, and knowing how much she values respect, my second question is to ask her how such an interruption could come about, and, given the code of conduct, which she assured the last electors' annual meeting she had signed, whether it would pass the pub test of integrity, respect and fairness. Thank you.
In relation to question 1, I reject the premise of the question. It appears to be based on entirely false narrative. In relation to question 2, the paragraph referred to in the report was neither fact-checked nor investigated by the authorised persons. I provided comprehensive notes on these false allegations. However, given the complete lack of procedural fairness afforded to myself in the writing of the report, I have little doubt others mentioned in the report have been maligned also. Your question is best directed to the department and to the authors of the report, as I have provided detailed information on that matter to them, and others may have done also. We have no public statements tonight, so that end public's time for this evening. Item 7, petitions and approved deputations, of which there are none. So we come to item 8, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. 8.1, ordinary council meeting of the 20th of April 2021. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Nash. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Davis. Can I put that motion to the vote, please? So the minutes are carried 11-0. For item 9, announcements by the presiding member without discussion, I just have a few brief comments to make about our Subi Blooms event, which was occurring it would have been the 4th time, except for COVID, it was kind of the 3rd time. And I received lots and lots of very positive feedback on this event. So I just wanted to share that that event, which leverages off the beautiful charm that so many love about the city of Subiaco, does help us reclaim our reputation as one of Perth's leading precincts. And this has only been made possible by the hard work of the Subiaco team. So CEO, I'd like you to please pass on to the Subiaco team my thank you on behalf of Council and the city of Subiaco for turning our beautiful streets into a flowers lover paradise and helping us to bloom in Subiaco. So councillors, we come now to officers' reports. We have a small number of items this evening, and for the information of the public gallery, it is intended that a number of the recommendations presented to this meeting will be grouped together and passed on block, as no alternates or amendments have been received for these recommendations. I have a possible en-bloc motion in front of me for C1, C2 and C4. If there's no one wanting to remove any items, we will look for a mover and a seconder for the en-bloc motion. Have a mover from Councillor Nash and a seconder from Councillor Davis. Can I have the en-bloc vote, please? So the en bloc motion is carried 11-0. So our one item for individual presentation this evening is C3, disposal of city property by lease of 450 Rockaby Road, Subiaco, to the WA Pcyc, and it's been removed from the en bloc because I have an amendment on this item. So it's on page 11 of our agenda with the officer's recommendation outlined in the report. So do I have a mover and a seconder for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Hammersley? Councillor McMullen? Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. Yes, I would. I'm going to support the officer's recommendation. I've reviewed the report, sought additional information, and tracked through the history of the way that the city has proposed to deal with leases. Whether I agree with it or not is not relevant, because there is a policy in place. It's something that's come to fruition after an enormous amount, well, gather looks like an enormous amount of work that was done. It's been considered, and perhaps even more importantly, steps have been taken under the policy in respect of other social tenants that the city has. Now, we're regularly lectured about governance, and part of that is having policies, having procedures. Of course, they must, each individual decision needs to be considered on its merits, but that's in a framework of the issues that are relevant to that decision. So in this case, it's quite clear that there has been a rigorous process. There's been a negotiation, and last week we were told that the lessee was broadly supportive and understood the circumstances in which this negotiation was occurring. So given all those factors, and that the proper process, if we are to completely abandon what was set in train in 2016 and which has been implemented since that time, then that proposal ought to be brought to council as a matter, and we should look at that. And if we're going to get rid of the whole lot, then we have to treat everyone equally, and not make these decisions on an ad hoc basis. So for all those reasons, I'm going to be supporting the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor McMullen?
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. I think Councillor Hammersley summed up my position pretty well. I thought this would be quite a straightforward matter in that we seem to be applying our social property policy framework, and we've gone into this meeting understanding that the tenant was broadly happy with the commercial terms on offer. Since the briefing, it's been put to us that that maybe the PCYC would like a better deal, and that there may be merit in diverging from our social property policy framework. So I'd just like to understand what's happened and what the grounds for deviating from the policy might be. And I'm sure that'll come out in debate, but for now I really see no mischief in supporting the officer recommendation. It is a very fair deal for a very worthwhile not-for-profit, and look, if this gets up and the amendment doesn't, I don't think we need to be embarrassed about it. It's still a big step up for the PCYC, and a help up, I should say, and look, I'm sure they'll be able to do a lot of great things with the space. But for now, I'm pretty happy to second the officer recommendation. Thank you.
If no one else is keen to speak, I'm happy to test my amendment, seeing everyone knows it's on there, and it sounds like that's going to be what gets discussed. Sure. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. one thing I'd like to point out, I've done a number of leases of commercial properties over the years, and the first thing I'd raise is the age of the building. It looks like from the background material, the building, it's built in the 70s, and there's one thing that I'm fairly conscious of, and that is structural work is being noted in the part of the maintenance requirements. We've got cleaning, general maintenance, and the general maintenance is outlined there, which is including, without limitation, pest control, gutter cleaning, air conditioning, fencing and fire protection equipment as part of the maintenance. That's all pretty normal. What doesn't seem normal to me is the structural work, particularly on an old building. Tenant must promptly carry out all repairs and replacements necessary to keep the premises structurally sound and in a weatherproof condition. Well, last time I've looked at most of my commercial leases, including the property I own down the road here, I'm responsible as the owner of the building to fix those things, not as the tenant, of which I am both. But that seems a little bit unreasonable, the building and the size of the infrastructure there to me. So that's my main sticking point on this. I suppose we could go back to square one and start talking about how we did put in a system of assessing people renting our properties, but I won't challenge that today. But I am saying that I believe having to assess the structural work will come at great costs and concern for a charity group. The first thing they would have to do is benchmark that, which means they've got to get an engineer in there to have a look through the whole building to assess it for condition, and then worry that one day they may be required through water encroachment or undermining of a foundation or something like that, which really is something I think they would worry about. So I would be wanting to look at that in particular as part of any form of amendment. I think the structural work component to that lease is one of their sticking points. Thank you.
Councillor De Vries.
This is a question through you, Mayor Taylor, to the Director for Corporate Services. The appropriate person might be able to answer the question. It seems that the negotiations that we were told took place, and this figure was arrived at through those negotiations, that $7,000 odd, rather doesn't meet with the information that's been additionally provided. My question is, who was that person that was in that negotiation? Was it the same person who's written the letter with different information? And if so, what sort of differences were demonstrated by the further information, and has that changed anybody's opinion that came up with that figure of $7,000? But that's not asking to enter debate.
Thank you. Councillor De Vries is talking about the letter from the PCYC CEO, David Van Oren, who has written to Council pointing out that they had some sticking points with the lease negotiations. So just to give you some context. Director Hawkins, will you be answering that question?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor Taylor, and thank you for the context to the letter as well. I regret that I wasn't aware of that letter before this evening. Look, we wouldn't put a lease up to council for approval unless we had an in-principle agreement with the tenant first. We just, to be frank, wouldn't go through the process of writing the report if we didn't already have that in-principle agreement. So
just to get back to the question was, who were the negotiations with? Was it the same person, the CEO of PCYC?
Thanks. The negotiations were with Mr. Paul Valerius from PCYC. He's the Facilities and Asset Manager. The negotiations were undertaken by my team, and on the 19th of April, Mr. Valerius emailed me to say that he had had notification from his CEO that the terms were acceptable and what were the next steps. Thank you.
Further questions or speakers? Councillor Hammersley.
Just to follow up on that, I had a good read of the annual report for this organisation, which is a very, very substantial organisation. Can you tell, can the staff tell us, is Mr Paul Valeri's somebody who's associated at the corporate level in the organisation or at the Subiaco branch?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, I believe he does work from the WA head office, which is based in the Homebase complex.
Further speakers to the motion? Councillor Jennings.
It's a question, Mayor. I have an understanding that the PCYC's budget is for rental premises is something like over $700,000 per annum. Does staff know anything about that figure at all?
Oh, sorry.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor Taylor, apologies, we don't have any visibility of that, other than to say I am aware that they pay commercial rates for some premises.
If there's no further speakers on the motion as it stands, I'll look to introduce my amendment. It has been circulated, so I'll be moving my amendment. Do I have a seconder for my amendment? Thank you, Councillor Nash. So I'd like to introduce my amendment by reading the vision statement of our community-led document, the Strategic Community Plan. In 2030, the City of Subiaco is a unique, popular and welcoming place. It celebrates its rich history while embracing the diversity and vitality of the present. Its parks, public spaces, events and recreational opportunities are easily accessible and promote a healthy and happy lifestyle for all. There is a diverse range of local businesses and entertainment that contribute to a lively atmosphere. The city faces the challenges of the future with strong leadership, an innovative approach, and an emphasis on community value and voices. Sustainability is at the core of the community and underpins the city's operations. Yet tonight we're considering a recommendation for a 900,000% rent increase for the charity of the City of Subiaco, one that prides itself on providing recreational opportunities that are easily accessible and promote a healthy and happy lifestyle for all. A charitable organisation that has been in the City of Subiaco since the PCYC was founded in WA in 1941. In updating the PCYC lease with the City of Subiaco, I propose we keep the rental charge and the maintenance arrangements as per the existing lease, one that has served the community and the City of Subiaco well since 1973. The PCYC currently leases 7 centres across Western Australia, in addition to the 9 properties they own. And the rental agreements are as follows, and I'll read them out in alphabetical order with their lease amounts. Number 1 is Carnarvon PCYC, $1 per annum with the Department of Education. Collie PCYC, $1 with the Shire of Collie. Fremantle PCYC, $1 with the City of Fremantle. Gosnells PCYC, $1 per annum with the City of Gosnells. Kensington PCYC, $1 with the Town of Vic Park. Roebourne PCYC, $1 with the City of Karratha. And then Subiaco PCYC, currently $1, but soon to be a possible $7,100 per annum with the City of Subiaco. If this officer's recommendation is supported by Council without amendment, the City of Subiaco will be the only local government in the state to refuse to support the work of the PCYC with peppercorn rent. I do think this is an embarrassing proposition, particularly given the recommendation is for an increase of such a large amount. In 2019-2020 financial year, the Subiaco PCYC made a loss of $36,000. I asked the CEO of the PCYC about it, and Mr Van Oren advised that this was budgeted for and expected. He explained that no PCYC centre is profitable as they focus on delivering accessible and relevant programs that meet the needs of the community. Just in this month's agenda, the City of Subiaco saw fit to spend over twice this amount of this increase, with over $5,000 in legal costs on our lease arrangements. In our own report into the matter, it notes on page 15 that the PCYC is a registered charity with its principal objective to empower and assist disadvantaged and at-risk children and young people in WA. But on page 13 we see the following stated for the PCYC. It is a statewide organisation with a capacity to fundraise. The WAPC were accordingly defined as a Category D in the framework, that is, in the same category as state departments. I'm not sure if we can argue all of this from a good faith position. Setting the rent at such a figure with the additional clauses on GST, annual increases and structural maintenance is an impossible impost. I do actually have a question for the Director of Corporate Services. Director Hawkins, it says in the officer's comment on my amendment, on the amendment, that the city repaired a badly worn out sewer connected to this site at a cost of over $19,000. If the PCYC were to sign this lease as is, would such repairs and unexpected costs like this be the responsibility of the PCYC? And so that's my first question.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, it would depend on the terms of the lease, but generally water, electricity, sewage are what you would term services under a lease, and the landlord's responsible for those.
I think you missed my question. My question was, if you've got the officer's comment in front, it talks about the capital, I think it calls it a capital repair to a badly worn out sewer connection. It's not talking about water costs or utilities costs. It's in the officer's comment. Have you got that? I'm asking that if the PCYC was to sign this lease, would they be expected to pay for costs such as this?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Taylor, I was in the process of answering the question. Sewage would be usually considered a service under a lease. The general position is that the landlord is responsible for maintaining services. So in that scenario, the city would bear the cost of the sewer connection.
What I'm asking, which I think is different to what your comment says here, it's around the structural costs that I think Councillor Rowe raised also. What types of things, if they sign the lease, are they going to be likely to be up for?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, well, yes, that's a different question. Structural elements, for example, if it was a roof leak, that would be a structural element, and they would be responsible for attending to the roof leak.
Thank you. I'm just surprised then it's referred to as a capital cost, because my understanding of commercial leases is that's the differentiation between capital. I'll continue. I'm unsure that if it was a commercial lease, whether an increase of 900,000% per annum rent would be possible. But however this lease is described, such an increase of rent to this charitable organisation is unconscionable. In any event, and I guess thankfully from the Subiaco PCYC's perspective, the Minister for Lands will need to sign off on this agreement as the land is on a management order. I think I'll leave the last argument for the Subiaco PCYC CEO, and I quote, "In summary, PCYC exists so that children and young people have a safe place to go. Our recreational activities, diversionary programs, and alternative education and training opportunities keep children and all people active and engaged so that they can reach their potential and stay on a positive life path. What really helps with the transformation of young people's lives is the trust and relationships that are built with experienced youth workers, coaches, and mentors. There are countless examples of this that have occurred and continue to occur at the Subiaco PCYC. We have an attendance of approximately 2,000 people per month at the centre. PCYC would not be able to achieve these great outcomes without a strong, positive and supportive partnership with the City of Subiaco. Please consider this rather desperate call to reconsider the current lease position and instead continue to offer a peppercorn rent and continue to take responsibility for the structural maintenance of this facility. I commend this amendment to you." So, Councillor Nash, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Look, I won't add much more to that. I think that sums it up well. Look, my view is that the PCYC provides an essential service that's not replicated elsewhere in our community and is arguably of even greater need now than at any time in its long history. Our support of the services it offers to our community should not be in question and should not be jeopardised for the sake of $7,099 additional income for the City of Subiaco. And as the CEO, David Van Oren, wrote in his letter, which we received earlier this afternoon to the Mayor, in our view, the new set of terms and conditions put forward by the City of Subiaco are excessive and place unreasonable financial risk and burden on the PCYC as a not-for-profit, community-based organisation. They certainly do not align with the spirit of our partnership, nor acknowledge the valuable role PCYC plays in the Subiaco community. That quote from his letter certainly would seem to be at odds with the information that we've received from the city. I'll be supporting the amendment.
Speaker against the amendment? Yep.
I'll ask a question through you, please, Mayor. I'm just wondering if we partner with the PCYC or provide them with any other kinds of support in addition to the lease terms that we're offering them. Thank you.
I'm getting shaking heads, so I'm thinking that's a no, or is it no, I don't want to answer the question. Director.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, I should have been, sorry, that wasn't very clear. The answer is no, we don't have any formal partnership or funding arrangements in place with the PCYC. We meet with the managers regularly, they do great programs down there, but they don't seek any additional city support for their programs. Thanks.
Councillor Hammersley.
This is for advice from the CEO. I was seeking to understand. The problem that I have with this is we're in a no-win situation here. In essence, this has been sprung on us. Basically, as I see it, it's to completely torpedo a policy of this city. And I think it's...
Oh, sorry, are you asking a question? Oh, okay, thank you.
So we're in a no-win situation because if we don't enforce the policies that are well considered and have been, as I said in my address, they have been implemented, we are going to be maligned. Either way, tonight we will be maligned. and it'll be in the Western Suburbs Weekly. So the question is for the CEO, is there a mechanism by which we can adjourn this debate to consider whether or not the entire policy should be torpedoed? Because I can't see how we can charge a kindergarten $100, but an organisation with a balance sheet with net assets of $13 million.
Sorry, Councillor Hammersley, you have spoken to the item. So the question, if the question is there a mechanism to discuss this, or defer it, or delay it, or bring it back? If that's the question, then that can be addressed. The thing, though, that I note you keep saying is around torpedoing. In answer to your question, I would suggest it's whether the allocation of the PCYC under the category scheme is fair might be a question, as opposed to torpedoing a policy. But back to the specific question, which was around what we can do to review the proposal before us, I'm assuming we have a number of procedural motions we could possibly undertake.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The simplest way of dealing with that specific question, Councillor, would be to use Clause 7.1a of the Local Procedures Law, which says that the meeting proceed to the next business, which would mean that debate on this item would stop, and of course the next business is the closure of the meeting.
CEO, is that the equivalent of the motion lapsing?
Possibly, but it would also be result in the review of the policy coming back at a subsequent meeting.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a real dilemma with this because in November 2018, under item C4, this policy was passed unanimously, and then in March 2019, with an attachment that clearly suggested a rental fee for this organisation, again the item was passed unanimously. Now we have a policy around this. There was no suggestion at the briefing forum that there was any problem with that policy framework. Our staff have dutifully gone off and negotiated with the organisation, even though we all knew that it was a category D and that there would be a risk that a certain presumption that there would be a rental increase of some sort. Now, if you look at the 19th of March 2019, under the heading of risk and asset implications, it says, the social property policy framework addresses the risks identified within the 2015 audit report, namely, 1, financial loss through unrecovered rent revenue and property outgoings. Second dot point, having an ad hoc social property portfolio characterised by a divergent pool of peppercorn and negotiated agreements. And third dot point, the third dot point as a risk identified by the 2015 audit report was reputational damage. As with no policy position in place, the city would have difficulty responding to claims of inequity in the asset management. Inequity in the asset management. Now, we arrived tonight and there is a letter from the CEO. Even though staff have already negotiated a position with the police academy and there was no apparent objection to it. So I have a question for you. Actually, I have a couple of questions for you, Mayor. One, why is this letter only on our desk when we arrived tonight? And why wasn't it presented earlier? And why did the staff have no knowledge of this letter? So that's my first question. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud, you will see that you have been emailed a copy of the letter. There was some issues with the attachment being saying it was corrupted, and there was a lot of effort to make sure everyone had a copy of this letter. I am not going to be dragged into the differences of the statement from the PCYC and the statement from staff. All I know is that as an individual elected member, I wanted to reassure myself after hearing from staff, and actually at the agenda briefing there was a lot of discussion on this item. You yourself asked what the profit and loss statement was for the facility, and that wasn't answered by staff. I was interested to know what the PCYC thought. So I spoke to the facilities manager, who then put me on to the CEO. And here we are with additional information so we can make the best decision for our community tonight.
Just a further point, Mayor, is there any reason why you haven't called standing orders 4.7 and 4.8 for your debate tonight?
Would you like me to answer the question, or do you think it's bleedingly obvious that as the Mayor I'm participating as an equal elected member in debate?
So, Mayor, I'd prefer that you led by example and called the appropriate standing orders. Thank you.
Is that a question or a statement, Councillor? I think you've made your point. Are you going to continue your debate this evening, or do you have further questions?
So you're refusing to call the standing orders?
I'm not speaking, Councillor. I'm answering your questions. Are you debating or are you asking a question?
You have clearly spoken because you presented an amendment.
Okay. Any further questions or statements on the matter before us? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be supporting or I won't be supporting this amendment and supporting the staff's recommendation. The mentions of the 7,100% increase does give a misleading impression, in my view, of the scale of the increase, and which is, as was also stated, was $1 to $7,000 odd dollars. So talking in percentage terms creates a possibly false impression that it's an unmanageable increase. I note that the letter from the PCYC, which is dated the 13th of May, does not mention that during negotiations with staff that there was any objection to the terms of the negotiation and the lease negotiations that we were told about last week. So that's a curious thing that is not mentioned in there. One would think that if it's so objectionable that the PCYC would have mentioned that during negotiations, and indeed that would be emphasised in this letter, which it isn't. Thank you.
Any other speakers for the amendment? Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I would say a couple of things historically, and that is when we were doing these adjustments some time ago, it was very difficult, and not every scenario was put in front of you each time. So it is very difficult when you're dealing with a charity of this substance, that you know their background. I don't like to look at the financial side of it so much as I'd like to look at what do they do for the community. And I know from experience, having had to look after 6 children, that this is an incredibly important part of life. Kids can go off the rails just so easily, and all these activities are extremely important. They're so engaging, they get hooked into it, they want to get involved in the teams and so on and so forth. So I see the benefit in it as a charity. This is peanuts, really. I ask myself, do I want to be part of a council that's the first one? Anyone can make their own decisions. I'm not trying to say we're making a... But personally, I don't want to make a decision to be the first council to apply anything other than a peppercorn lease. And you can see how the questions about whether something is part of the sewerage line is part of the structure. I mean, the sewerage lines can break down within the property bounds or outside the property bounds. You know, why did they break down? Why, you know, was it trees, local trees? There's so many interpretations. So I don't like the idea of the structural clause in there. I wouldn't sign a lease like that. I'd also say that this letter coming in late is unfortunate, but it is factual, it's here now. You can either defer this decision and they continue on as is, and then we go and look at reviewing the way we do all our properties. But I can tell you it'll take you more than one meeting. It'll take months. These people will like surety. Personally, I would just let it go as it is. I would go along with the Mayor's amendment myself. That's the way I feel about it. We can have a win by doing that. It's not the end of the world. Councillor McMullen made that point. I don't think we need to sweat over this so much, but you really want to be the first council out of that list to start charging when they do such an important work. So I would leave the maintenance and structural work. I think whatever's on that amendment, the 7,000, I was like that about it. Maybe we were talking to the wrong person. You know, maybe this is the person we should have been talking to all along, who the CEO would know their financial position better than someone who's associated with the local branch. Turnover's not one thing too. Financially, there's just turnover. It's what it costs to put everybody up and all the things that go on there. So I'm happy to support this now. If you want to go back and review the other policies later, so be it. But right now, I'd like to just put this to bed and reconsider the other components of our properties later on. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Rowe was actually concerned about the structural maintenance of the facility, and yet this letter refers to continuing to take on the structural maintenance. Now, you know, which could be the greater cost? So I'd like to propose that we defer this item to the next OCM so that staff can go back and talk with the organisation and sort out the rent and the structural maintenance of the facility and the subsequent costs. Thank you.
I note your comments, Councillor Stroud. In the letter it does say specifically that the key sticking points is taking on the costs associated with the structural work. Councillor Hammersley?
I have a question on that theme, because I came out of the agenda briefing forum with the impression, and it may well be wrong, that under the current lease they were already taking on that role. So perhaps I'm wrong, but this is a question for staff. Were they? And if so, does that mean the only substantive change that we're talking about is from $1 to $7,100? Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley, the feedback from the meeting of the agenda briefing was that the main changes were they currently cover maintenance and they will need to cover structural work, and the other change is the rent. Did you have anything other further to add? No? Thanks.
So the existing lease, they do cover maintenance, and the existing lease, they don't cover structural work. Is that what you were saying?
My understanding is that the current lease is $1. The maintenance is covered. So as Councillor Rowe highlighted as well, with painting, and if they were to end their lease, for example, they'd have to return it all back. Internal maintenance. If this lease is signed, then it will take on a structural component, and there will be requirements to get a baseline of what the structure is at the moment.
Yes, can staff please, through you, thank you, Mayor, give me the procedural motion to refer this item to the next OCM so staff can further negotiate the rent and the maintenance of the building. 7.1A. Why? I don't think I want to go to next business. I think I just want to refer it. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I want to go to refer it to the next business. Isn't it better to actually move a motion to refer it to? Oh, so it's 7. I think it's 7.1C that the meeting. No, sorry, B, that the debate be adjourned, and then you go to 7.62, was it? Oh, 7.1, a motion that the debate be adjourned, is to state the time to which the debate is to be adjourned, and if carried, has the effect that all debate on the substantive motion or amendment ceases immediately, but continues at the time stated in the motion. So it's 7.1B and 7.61A.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor. I concur with the CEO. The best approach would be, because this is that would be very problematic, would be to move the procedural motion that you proceed to the next business. The effect of that is that the debate ends, no decision is made, and the meeting moves on as the CEO, which said was the close of the meeting, and effectively that enables staff to take the views that have been expressed from elected members at the meeting, talk to the CEO and work out how we go forward and what we would then ultimately bring back to council once we've followed that process. So I'd concur with the CEO. The cleanest way would be to move a procedural motion that the meeting proceed to the next item of business.
So we have a mover. Okay. Just to confirm, Councillor Stroud, as you have spoken a couple of times, it has to be someone who hasn't spoken to move the procedural motion. Councillor Powell. So, Councillor Powell, you're moving 7.1A procedural motion to move to the next item of business. Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Powell? Councillor Phelan. So we've got a mover in Councillor Powell, seconder in Councillor Phelan for procedural motion 7.1A. So I'll call the vote on that, please. And the motion is carried 8-3. So I think everyone knows what's coming next. We now move to our next item of business, which is the closure of the meeting. I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of the 18th of May 2021 closed at 6:24 p.m. Thank you.